This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
GSMC Sports Podcast presented by GSMC Podcast Network. My name is Chris Blades, and before I get started today, I want to make sure I take the time out to remind you, as always, if you haven't already, please make sure you subscribe to the podcast. It'll help make sure you never miss an episode, help make sure you're always on top of when we drop our latest stuff. Also, if you could, please as well, if you like what you hear today, if you like what you've heard in past episodes, then give us a 5-star rating, write us a nice review. It's very appreciated, very helpful. Let us see what you guys like, what you guys dislike, the ways we can improve, all that fun stuff. And also, if you're on social media, we're on social media, so you can find us there. Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. We can talk, we can chat, we can debate, we can discuss. And as we discussed on the last episode, there were some big decisions in college, and mainly around the world of college athletics coming up. On Wednesday, the Ivy League announced their decision on what they're going to do with their sports. And now the Big Ten, because we'll talk about that in the next segment. And now the Big Ten is going through with their own plan. As of right now, the Big Ten is moving to a conference-only model for all sports this fall, not just football. The Big Ten on Thursday announced it will go to a conference-only season for all fall sports, including football, amid unprecedented times due to the Rona, obviously. We are facing uncertain and unprecedented times, and the health, safety, and wellness of our student athletes, coaches, game officials, and others associated with the sports programs and campuses remain our number one priority, the Big Ten said in a statement. By limiting competition to other Big Ten institutions, the conference will have the greatest flexibility to adjust to its own operations throughout the season and make quick decisions in real time based on the most current evolving medical advice and the fluid nature of the pandemic. And Big Ten is the first of the Power 5 conferences to make this type of major change to its fall sports. The SEC on Thursday said it continues to meet with campus leaders to determine the best path forward, for fall sports. And Big 12 Commissioner Bob Blasphemy said in a statement that he has been advised to move ahead slowly and plan for all available scenarios. Meanwhile, the ACC has already said it would delay all fall sports until at least September 1st. Makes sense, seeing as, North Carolina I know definitely the football, but I'm pretty sure the school had to shut everything down after, there was, 30 plus positive tests in their, athletics. So, they had to at least be we got to push it back. And so that makes sense. The SEC, league officials, and athletic directors are scheduled to meet early next week, but have no plans to make any decision on the fall schedule. Sources confirmed to ESPN. SI.com was the first to report on the meeting. If college football can be played this fall, Big Ten presidents and athletic directors preferred the conference-only model, which will eliminate some long-distance travel and help ensure teams are being tested for the coronavirus universally. Multiple sources inside the league and around college football told ESPN. Other sports affected include men's and women's cross country, field hockey, men's and women's soccer, and women's volleyball. The new conference-only schedule for all fall sports will be released at a later date. The Big Ten said the conference also said it will continue to evaluate other sports. Ohio State Athletic Director Gene Smith said he would be in favor of playing 10 conference football games. I'm hopeful that that's where we end up next week and locking that down. We talked about that, and that's our preference. Smith said if they're able to play in September, who even knows if that's going to be possible. If they would play in September, but something happens later in the month or in October, we can hit the pause button and provide a window of opportunity for our student athletes not to be put at risk. The schedule would allow them to move games, be flexible, all that fun stuff. This is a long article about it on ESPN if you wanted to read more into the fine details of it. So this is the first step of this nature across, like they mentioned, across the Power 5 conferences. And I think at the very least it makes sense for the time being. As we will talk about in the next segment, like I said, we'll talk about what the Ivy League did, and then also a little bit about Stanford and how I think that could also be a thing that's and what happened with them, and how I think that could potentially be an issue for other college sports, not just the fall ones. So like I said, it makes sense for the time being if you're going to assume that you're going to play college football this year. Now, I don't think it's going to happen. I've been pretty consistent with that on all these episodes. You guys know that by now. But I figured these big-time schools with these big-time TV contracts and all this money to be made, or to be lost, I should say, if there's no football in the fall, even if they were to make it up in the spring, but still, no football in the fall, you figure they're going to try this first. Like, hey, look, maybe we'll have it better under control in about 2 months. I mean, it's possible because the states that were a little bit more open are now telling people, especially I think it was in Texas. I know they put down the mask mandate statewide. I'm pretty sure, and I know in Arizona that was another one. Even though they're both places that are extremely hot. It's the summer, so everywhere is hot. But obviously, Arizona heat's a little different. I was out there a few years ago in the summertime, and it was almost unbearable just to even walk from the hotel to the car to drive anywhere. It was the heat was a mess. And then again, it's hot when you get in the car. It was a whole disaster. But that's not the point. The point is that now, like I said, some of these states are mandating masks, which has worked literally everywhere else, and was integral in the states that were able to kind of flatten the curve, if you will, and aren't seeing the spikes that some other states are seeing due to the reopening and stuff like that. So if we do that and things are a little bit better, all right, cool. Maybe then we could have the fall sports season. They just play the 9 to 10 conference games on many other games, and then we're good. But like I said, I don't know if that's plausible. I don't think anybody should assume that. While it would be great and while it would be nice, and that's obviously what everyone hopes for, at this point, as I kind of mentioned, you have to be ready for every possibility. You can't just assume, all right, yeah, we're going to be clear to go. We're good to go come September. Based on the uncertainty of it, and also based on the belief that a second wave will come along, assuming we don't handle the second wave any better than we handled this ongoing first wave. There's no real reason to say that it's going to be fine. And like I said, if and when that comes in the fall, winter time, and the football season hasn't finished, or you have to halt in the middle, then that becomes a big thing. Now you have to figure out what you do with that and all that stuff. And also, again, we haven't even, as we talked about a little bit on the last episode, the fact that not every school is doing in-person classes kind of matters, in my opinion. Because, again, I don't understand how you could legitimately say, as a school, hey, people aren't allowed on campus, but we're still going to play sports. Because if it's not safe for you to go to class, where, again, you're not, especially when you're playing football, you're not tackling people, you're not sweating on people, you're not breathing near people, all that stuff. If it's not safe for you to go to class, where you can realistically distance yourselves, at least a little bit. On campus is a completely different story, but at least in the classroom, if it's not too packed, you could realistically distance yourself. But you're going to have them on a sports field or in a stadium or whatever playing a sport where they have to be body to body with somebody. That seems a little hypocritical, in my personal opinion. I'm not, like I said, I'm not surprised that a conference did this. I didn't expect it to be this soon. I thought they were going to take more time, think about it, deliberate on it. But yeah, no, the Big Ten decided they want to get out ahead of it in July just to let everybody know, look, this is what we're going to try to do. And if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, then hey, we'll go back to the drawing board from there. But for the time being, we're not even going to try to pretend like this is going to work out. So kudos to them, at least, for being ahead of the curve in that regard, and just being like, hey, we're going to be the school that decides, or the conference that decides, look, we gotta get this thing going, and we gotta get this plan working. Because, like I said, there's a lot of schools or a lot of conferences that are still a little like, hey, we're gonna take it slow. We're gonna still try to see if we can play it out, and that's also gonna be weird because I think the college football playoff committee said they're gonna do the same criteria, which is gonna be strange if there's like no out of conference. Like some schools try to play out of conference games and other schools don't. It's like, how would that factor in all that stuff? And speaking of that, some of the bigger matchups we're not gonna get to see because of no non-conference football, at least from the Big Ten. That means no Ohio State, Oregon, which is going to be, that was the second week of the season, I believe, and that was going to be a pretty anticipated game, at least for me. No Michigan at Washington the first week. No Iowa versus Iowa State. No Penn State versus Virginia Tech. No Appalachian State versus Wisconsin. No Miami at Michigan State. No Cincinnati and Nebraska. And potentially no Wisconsin versus Notre Dame at Lambeau. So, it's unfortunate, but like I said, I don't imagine any conference eventually. Again, we're still in the early stage of this, but I don't imagine any conference eventually being like, we're going to try to play the season as if nothing's happening in the country. Like, that just doesn't seem realistic to me. Now, I'm not in charge of these things, I'm not making the decision. I don't know how much money they stand to lose by canceling some of these out-of-conference games or non-conference games, but still, I'm just saying, like, at this point, you gotta try to create whatever sort of faux bubble you can. Because even, like I said, I have my doubts about this whole NBA thing, but at least in theory, if you don't bring the Rona in, then you're kind of shielding yourself from the outside, which in theory makes sense. So, in that same vein, you want to limit the amount of flights you gotta take, and limit the amount of people you interact with from different areas. Like, all right, if our area, like the whole Big Ten conference, has it under control, then all right, then we should be fine. I mean, we're gonna have cases pop up here and there because that's just what's gonna happen. But we're not flying out to the West Coast, and we're not going down south, and we're not going to the Midwest. We're not, like I said, we're not hitting every region where potentially now that's a bigger chance for a spread. If you can kind of concentrate your schedule and to just, hey, let's keep it in this one area, and as long as we're doing everything we can, we don't got to worry about anybody else. And I think that's kind of the smart way to do it. Just like, look, just handle what you can control, and just, if everybody else wants to do whatever, then let them do whatever. You got to just be like, look, we're going to be on top of this, try to keep everybody as safe as possible, and try to get the season done as fluid as possible, and not have too many hiccups, not to have any stops, stuff like that. But yeah. We'll see how that goes. We'll see if any other conferences decide they want to make this decision. I didn't even think, like I said, when we talked about the Ivy League on Tuesday, I didn't expect anyone to follow the Ivy League, at least not right away. And that's obviously not what the Big Ten did. But I didn't even expect the decision to come. I thought it was just going to be like, going to let the Ivy League do their thing, and then like we'll get back to our drawing board and figure it out from there. But I wonder if the Big Ten decision will, again, the SEC, I think, is, like this says, meeting next week, and they didn't seem to have any, I guess, pressure or any belief that they were going to make this kind of decision next week. But I just wonder if there's any other conference that may be like, you know what, that's, at least for the time being, that might be a good idea. Or maybe, like I said, who knows, maybe somebody will copy the Ivy League. But we'll see, and whatever happens, we will be here to talk about it. But yeah, it should be interesting. See if it works. I really have no idea, because I don't know what the world's going to look like a week from now, let alone 2 months. So we'll see how that goes. But like I said, it makes sense that they would decide to do this. I'm not saying the decision makes sense, but it makes sense that the conferences would try to do this first in order to make sure that they don't lose out on too much money. So, when we get back, we're going to talk about the Ivy League, what their decision was. Like I said, and then also we're going to talk about Stanford a little bit and what happened with them and their athletics, and how I think it could affect other athletic programs around the country. So, we'll talk about all that right after the break. Stay right there.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
What did they decide? They decided to do, in my opinion, the smart thing and rule out playing all sports this fall due to the coronavirus. This is, again, from ESPN. The Ivy League announced Wednesday that it has ruled out playing all sports this fall, becoming the first Division I conference to say it will not hold sports this upcoming semester due to the Rona, obviously. No decision has been made about winter or spring Ivy League sports or whether fall sports could be played in the spring of 2021. The campus policies make it impractical for competition to occur, at least through the end of the fall semester. I mean, yeah, Harvard was already doing online classes. Like, how was it going to work? And that's why today we're announcing, this is from their executive director of the Ivy League, I believe. That's why today we're announcing 8 campuses have announced their policies for the fall. Over the last 2 weeks, we've realized that the president, when we realized, and the presidents realized, based on these campus policies, that we couldn't have competition. We wanted to make sure the student athletes were aware of the outcome. And certainly is the right decision for the Ivy League, but it's difficult. Student athletes will be allowed to practice on campus in modified form. Robin Harris, the executive director, said. Harris said the conference based its decision on the 8 campus policies on COVID-19, which were cemented over the past 2 weeks, as I just mentioned. While they vary from school to school, collectively those policies made all fall competition impractical, at least through the end of the fall semester, because that's how long the schools anticipate these policies being in place. Harris said a good number of Ivy League schools have placed restrictions on travel for faculty, staff, and students, which includes athletes and coaches, obviously. Some also have restrictions for visitors, stringent social distancing policies, and limitations on the sizes of group gatherings. Harris said those factors might not influence other conferences as they, too, navigate their way through the coronavirus pandemic. So he talked about each school having to make a decision what's best for them. And it kind of just begs the question of will they be, like, ahead of the curve again? And by that, as we mentioned in the last episode, they were the first league really to shut stuff down. I mean, they were first anyone to shut anything down in America, at least, if I remember, at least sports-wise, if I remember correctly. Because on March 10th, the president decided they were going to cancel the men's and women's basketball tournaments because of the pandemic. And then 48 hours later, as we said, Rudy Gobert tested positive for that Rona, and then everything just shut down. And again, as we mentioned, at the time, everyone was like, well, this is too drastic. They shouldn't be doing this, blah, blah, blah. And they were like, no, this doesn't look good. And wow, lo and behold, the quote-unquote smart people were right. So there's that. So, yeah, it was a decision we kind of already figured they were going to make, at least in terms of, like, they already talked about possibly having sports in the fall and sports in the spring, and how it would work. So you figure that they were just going to be like, we're going to cancel it, and then that gives us more time to figure out how we're going to do this conference schedule in the spring and how we're going to make it work. But yeah, it's just unfortunate for all those young athletes that were hoping to have a good college season. I mean, a good final season, potentially if they're like seniors and stuff. And then even if they weren't, you're just looking forward to another season of playing college sports. And now that's put on hold, at least for the time being. And who knows, you might just miss this whole year. So I guess that'll be another thing. Just how is that going to work? I know in the spring, a lot of schools were just like, hey, or I think the NCAA might have just officially mandated, but I know a lot of schools were like, if you just want to come back, if you're a senior, then you can come back. Like, it's fine. If you don't, hey, you don't. But if you wanted to, you got that. I don't know if that was for every sport, but I feel like basketball. No, I think they did for spring. I don't know if they did it for the winter sports. That's a good point because they finished most of their season. Yeah, because they didn't do it for the winter. That's what it was, if I remember correctly. But yeah, so it's unfortunate for those kids and everything. Just like I said, because you came in hoping and wishing that you could have a good season, and you kind of knew it was going to be a little dicey, and now it's officially done for the time being. Like I said, I imagine they're going to try to see if they can do the spring thing. But again, it all depends on how we as a country handle a potential second wave. And you would like to think it'd be better than the first one, but you really don't know at this point. This year's kind of a mess. So I am expecting any and everything. I like to think I won't be surprised again, but I say that and then something crazy will happen within the next week, and I'll be like, wow, I didn't see that coming. So, yeah, there's that. But, yeah, it'll be interesting to see if anybody follows suit eventually. Because I think kind of like what happened with the tournament thing, they're going to try to do, all these schools, as we talked about the Big Ten, they're going to try to do their season, and then it's not going to work out, and then they're going to have to do what the Ivy League did. Because, I just don't see how it's going to be plausible to play college sports right now. Or at least, I guess I should say, in 2 months when, again, there's cases spiking all over the country. And, a lot of schools are being like, we're just going to have classes online. So we're not even allowing students on campus. So how can you have student athletes? It doesn't really make a whole lot of sense. Because apparently, for all the people that say they shouldn't get paid, they're like, oh, they're paying in education. But now you're not even getting the education. Or you're getting education, but you're not getting an in-person education. So how can you participate in person? Whatever. It just doesn't, that never made any sense. Like, if you're not having classes, then you can't have sports. That seems pretty cut and dry to me. Now, again, are all these conferences going to try it? Yes. But eventually, I do believe a lot of them will have to come around and do what the Ivy League has already done and unfortunately have to cancel fall sports. Or postpone, depending on what you want to do. Well, mainly just postpone football because that's going to get played at some point, I think. But yeah, I think they're going to have to postpone them eventually. But we'll see about that. And speaking of unfortunate situation for students, Stanford also, I guess this Wednesday or Thursday? This was Wednesday. Stanford had to cut 11 sports from their current 36 varsity sports programs, and those 11 included men's and women's fencing, field hockey, lightweight rowing, men's rowing, co-ed and women's sailing, squash, synchronized swimming, men's volleyball, and wrestling. And the main reason, obviously, was money. The financial model, this is from Yahoo Sports. I got a good article on this. The financial model supporting 36 varsity sports is not sustainable. The school said in a statement it was projecting a $12 million deficit for the fiscal year of 2021. And yeah, it's just this is a pretty big decision. And I don't think, because as the article mentioned, as of now, I think they said 56 teams have been cut this year from different across the country. According to Sports Illustrated, from soccer to baseball to from Cincinnati to Boise, Idaho, things are getting cut. It's very unfortunate, but that's what's happening right now. And it's bad because a lot of schools getting a lot less of that money, and they are having to do. They're going to potentially have to do the same things. And it just goes to show why I think a lot of these schools are going to try to get football played. Because football and the NCAA tournament, seeing as they already lost that money, a lot of schools, I feel like that's where the money for the other programs comes from. I know I was reading an article, I think this was back in March or April when stuff was starting to shut down, and there was a lot of schools don't make money on the sports that they have. But they can supplement that with all the money they make from football and all the money they make from basketball. So it's all right, we can have all these other sports because this is making X amount of money, and then we can just allow that to trickle down. That's why in a lot of these sports you see they don't even have like full guaranteed scholarships, or they have like a limited amount just because they can't afford to give that out. And I'm saying now, if they're just cutting the sports altogether, I mean, that's going to have not only ripple effects across the country and the collegiate ranks, but just ripple effects down into high school and potentially even youth level, depending on the sport. Just because if there are certain sports that are deemed not fiscally beneficial to schools, then they're just not going to have them. And like I said, then that cuts into like, all right, maybe if you're a person that likes volleyball, and you're like a guy and you don't want to play baseball, you don't want to play like basketball, hockey, whatever. You're like, all right, volleyball is my thing. I know when I'm at my high school, our volleyball team was very good, so I know that. And so I think a couple kids had gone to college to play volleyball. But I'm saying if Stanford was one of the schools you're looking at or we're hoping to go to, now you're just going to have to go there as a regular student, and that's. Maybe that's not what you wanted, or maybe you just realize, like, hey, I don't even want to do this sport at all if there's no real future in it. Like I said, a lot of people play football, a lot of people play basketball, a lot of people play baseball when they're younger because they have a dream that they can go pro. And, I mean, you weren't really going pro in volleyball, and again, just using it as an example, but volleyball anyway, unless you're going to the Olympics. But still, you could at least get to college. That could be your way into college. And then you get a good education, you get a good job, and then you go on about your life. But now I'm saying if college is going to be cutting these programs, then there is a lot of people that won't participate in these sports at the high school level, potentially. And like I say, even younger, because there's no future in it. So I'm saying now they're going to have ripple effects in the collegiate ranks in terms of now you're going to be a lot of kids that are only going to a certain school because of this team or that team. Now they're gonna be like, I can't afford to go here, or I don't want to go here because I'm staying here because of wrestling, I'm staying here because of rowing, or I'm staying here because of volleyball. Now just be like, look, let me move back closer to home, let me go somewhere else that's cheaper, blah blah blah, whatever. So I'm saying, and obviously, like I said, Stanford is not the first. They had the big, they cut like basically a third of their varsity sports. Like, that's like a big deal, especially for a school, again, Stanford, that has a lot of big-time alum, has a lot of money coming into the school. They're realizing, like, look, if things don't go our way with certain sports, like, we're not going to be able to afford this. And also just kind of unfortunate because imagine some of these sports, people behind the scenes potentially could have already been talking about cutting. Okay, when you look at the sports, none of them that are, again, I don't know how good Stanford is at any of these sports, but like when you think of like the big time sports, again, they're not basketball, they're not football, they're not even baseball, they're not even potentially track. Like those are kind of sports you see on softball. You see those sports on TV, or at least I see them on TV, like sports channels from time to time. I know volleyball does get on TV sometimes too, wrestling the same. But I mean, like lightweight rowing, fencing, sailing, squash. Unfortunately, those are things that don't, in theory, make a lot of money. Well, not in theory. I guess they just really don't make a lot of money. That's why they cut them. But yeah, just like this was probably a situation where people were trying to figure out how they were going to afford to have these sports anyway. And then now it's just an easy decision to just be like, look, we're going to lose money. Let's just cut these sports that we didn't really want anyway. So it's an unfortunate situation for all those athletes. So again, this is different than like, all right, your season is getting postponed and you can potentially come back and play like the next season, or come back and play in the spring, something like that. This is just like, yeah, if you're going here for volleyball and you're a man, I don't know what to tell you, big dog. Like, you're out of luck. I mean, you can still go here if you want, but like, you're just not going to be playing volleyball no more. And like I said, this is something I think is going to happen to a lot of schools in a lot of these lower, I don't want to say lower sports, because again, I went to Penn State, and Penn State's fencing team was amazing. Penn State's wrestling team, amazing. Penn State's women's volleyball team was really good for a good span of time. So they've had lesser sports. I mean, their men's basketball team was good for the first time in who knows how long. this past season, and then of course the NCAA tournament gets canceled, so they couldn't even get anything off that. But again, some of their quote unquote lower level sports are like really good. So it would be unfortunate if they were also a school that had to cut some of those lower sports. Again, these may not be the ones that are making money, but these are the ones that are very successful. Like, you're winning national championships in these sports, or at least you're competing for national championships in these sports. The football hasn't been, I mean, again, because of the whole Sandusky situation. The football team was a mess for a while. Or I guess a long time, depending on how you look at it. But yeah, so then, again, it was going to take some time to build back up, and now they're getting competitive, but they're still not at that. They're still not Ohio State. They're still not Alabama. They're still not Clemson. They're still not even Georgia, schools like that. But again, some of these lower programs are, and that might be the same thing as some of these schools. Like, all right, we have to cut these programs that aren't making any money, but these programs might be the ones we're successful in. So it's just like, it's a whole mess. But yeah, a lot of tough decisions are having to be made because of the Rona, and it's not going to stop. I mean, companies are doing it. Schools, they're trying to decide whether they're going to have kids back in school or not. And I mean, the fact that they're putting kids in danger potentially, or just putting, and thus putting like faculty and staff and potentially parents or guardians, whoever, in danger, is unsurprising to me based on the way that we've reacted as a country to the mass shootings that have happened at schools. So the fact that they're just going to be like, hey, yeah, kids it's safe to just go and tell them wear a mask and social distance, like they've never been a kid or seen kids and how they act in school. That is neither here nor is it there. But yeah, so a lot of tough decisions going to have to be made across the country in all facets of life over these next, I can't even guess how many months, because we don't know when this is going to end. But yeah, college is going to have to do, like I said, jobs, schools, everybody's going to have to make tough decisions. And a lot of people are going to end out of this unhappy. And I would imagine all those students at Stanford that had their programs cut were definitely under the unhappy, would fall in the unhappy bucket. But I don't want to say it is what it is. That sounds like I'm not sympathetic or empathetic with them, because I definitely am, but I don't know. It's very unfortunate. Let me just say that. It's very unfortunate. So, hopefully they'll be able to make it back up eventually in a few years or something, but I don't know. It's really like this, the whole situation is really just a mess. And speaking of being a mess, I tried to tell you that the NFL's plan is going to be kind of a disaster when it comes to the coronavirus. And some of the first things that have leaked already, or not leaked, I guess, they're potentially being talked about. I don't know if anything's official yet. There was a big thing that came out today, or Thursday. Yeah, obviously. That's when I'm recording. You guys are hearing this Friday. That came out today that had a lot of players in uproar, and just because it didn't make any sense. So we'll talk about that right after this break. Stay right there.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA. From the UFC to Extreme Cage Fighting, they got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
Are back here again, the GSMC Sports Podcast, presented by GSMC Podcast Network. So I feel bad for Tom Pelissero because he seems to be the one that's getting the sourcing, or he has the source that's like he's able to put out all the information about like what the NFL might do or might not do, and his mentions are on fire because of it. Not in his own fault, but because people are reacting to his tweets and talking about how foolish the things are that the NFL is suggesting. He had the one, I think we talked about it on last episode, with the escrow, that they were going to put like 35% of like the money in escrow for the players, and like literally every player was like, "This is stupid. Like, no, we're not going for it." Didn't matter how big or how obviously the big guys like the Michael Thomases of the world, they were like, what is this? Deshaun Watson was confused. I think it was Deshaun Watson. Regardless, a lot of players were like, "This is foolish. We're not doing this." And unfortunately, the same thing happened again to Tom. So, on the quick aside, Twitter is both good and terrible. There's a lot of things that you see, and it's just not really that enjoyable. But one of the better things, arguably, in my opinion, top 3 things to ever happen to Twitter or on Twitter, is the fact that now you can see like retweets like with comments. Before, you just like saw how many people retweeted, and you didn't know if they were like quote tweeting it or if they were just like retweeting it, not blindly, but just like retweeting it to like in support or whatever. But now when somebody, and again, this is not Tom Pelissero's fault, but when somebody says things and you're just like, "This is foolish," and then you want to see if you're crazy or if they're crazy, now you can go into the retweets with comments and see like, "Oh wow, they have significantly more retweets with comments." That means a lot of people are in agreement that this is crazy. So if you again, it's just great to read through some of these sometimes, especially on things that don't seem to be making any sort of sense. And yeah, this is one of those things that makes very little sense. So Tom Pelissero tweeted out that the NFL teams will be forbidden from post-game interactions within 6 feet of each other, and jersey exchanges between players will be prohibited during the 2020 season, sources say. Another way the NFL will look different in the COVID-19 world. Now, I was wondering to think about that for a second. Like, alright, cool, I understand, like, again, you're trying to limit the amount of things, limit the amount of interactions, you don't want too much, like, potentially cross-contamination, all that stuff. Cool, that's fine, I understand that. But, as most of the retweets with comments pointed out, it's completely fine for us to play, or it's completely fine because obviously the NFL players weren't the only ones commenting this, but it's completely fine for them to play a full contact sport for 3 hours. But, like, again, at the moment they go to exchange jerseys at the end of the game, all of a sudden, that's when COVID-19 is, like, a great worry for everybody. Like, come on, NFL. It comes off disingenuous. Like, you're trying to act like you care. But in reality, if you cared, you would either A, be having people play in some sort of bubble, even, again, not possible, but you would try to do something, or B, you just wouldn't have the season. Because, like, how? How are you going to say you're going to play football, tackle, run into each other, block, yell, sweat, do all these things against the people, but then as soon as the game is done, now all of a sudden you guys can't interact unless you're like 6 feet apart? Now, that literally makes 0 sense. 0 sense. Like, how, like, it, and it's just, it was just funny because, you got everybody. You got rookies. Henry Ruggs, like, y'all can't be serious. Alvin Kamara was like, LOL, that'll help. I know, like, Richard Sherman, like, Darius Slay and some other guys were talking about how this, like, makes no sense, because it really doesn't. Because, again, how can you justify playing a sport for 3 hours? This has been my issue with sports the whole time. Mainly outside of baseball, because in theory, outside the catcher and stuff, catcher and batter and the umpire, you can socially distance. You're not near anybody. Realistically, again, the ball's a different story, but you're not near anybody. So I'm saying, how can you realistically say that, look, you going out there and playing a sport and running and bumping into people is completely fine for us. But in the moment, again, that game is now finished, Now, of sudden, you got to have all these rules and restrictions in place. Like, again, if it were that serious, you would have these rules and restrictions in place and you wouldn't be playing the game. Or you'd be playing the game in a different way, which, again, you can't. But you'd be doing things differently. And again, that's not what they're doing. They're like, we're going to play the season as if nothing's going on, but we're going to put these little restrictions in there to make it seem like we care. And I don't want to say completely that the NFL doesn't care. Because again, they're well, again, I don't know, because we'll see what these guidelines are for training camps and stuff. But again, they cancel preseason games. Like they've done little things. They've been trying to they're trying to have teams limit the amount of time they were spending at their facilities. They had the draft virtually. Like, so again, they care enough, like in terms of like to make it look like to make like I can't think of the optics. They care enough to make like the optics look good. Like, they're gonna be like, all right, we're not gonna do anything that's like blatantly stupid to make us look bad. But we're also gonna have things in place that are blatantly stupid and make us look bad. And so it was like, what? Like, how do does this work? Like, how does it work? And again, this isn't gonna be the last thing. And and again, I'm not saying I'm mad at the actual decision, because again, it makes sense. You don't want to potentially, like, again, bring it from one team to another team, and now you got to play somebody else the next week, and you're bringing it back to your home state, your home city and home area, all that stuff. Like, I get that part. You don't want to, you kind of just want people to interact as little as possible, which would make total sense if you weren't playing a literal contact sport where they have to interact from different teams. It's not just the people you're practice with. It's not just people from your area. It's people from all over the country, where not every state has the situation handled all over the country. I think I want to say it's the Premier League. I don't know. Bear with me. I don't know my foreign soccer leagues like that. But I think it's the Premier League that said that that they're not going to allow their teams to play in their home stadiums, because again, they have things under control over there. So it's not like a big deal. So I think it's like for their playoffs, they're going to have them play in there, or like their league championships or whatever, they're going to have them play in their homes. Yeah, so the Champions League, excuse me. So I think the last 16 games will be hosted by home teams in the Champions League. So, excuse me, I'm forgetting that wrong. But yeah, so I'm saying when in places in Europe where things are under control, you can do that kind of thing and it be like understandable and justified. In America, where things aren't really at that level yet, you can't really justify it. But then we try to put things in place to make it look like we care, like I'm saying. And we're going to do this, we're going to do that. You can't do this after the game, you can't do this before the game. But you can still play the game, which, on its face, is crazy. But hey, we'll have to wait and see what other interesting things come out about the NFL. One of them potentially being this whole face shield thing. I know I've seen some pictures floated around on social media about, it was different. It was like the face mask part, but then they had a mask like where the rest of the face mask would be like covering like the chin strap and stuff. So I mean, it sounds good in like, it looks good in like a picture, but I don't know how practical it is to be able to manufacture those. And also be able to talk and yell out signals and call out plays and everything like that. But if they have to wear some sort of face shield, like a visor or something to like cover their face, one J.J. Watt said that he would not be happy with doing that and playing the season, which I found kind of interesting. Especially since his reason, I think it was, you can find this again from, I think it was from CBS Sports, but it's literally NBC Sports, ESPN. Like he has that account with Yahoo. You can you can find it anywhere. But basically, he was just saying that like he hates. I think he wore a visor like his second or third year in the league. Second year in the league, he put a visor on because he thought it would look cool, and he hated it so much that he said if I had to play in one again, I wouldn't play. And that's where the league might be. And I'm just saying, that's nuts. In my personal opinion. That's kind of nutty. Mainly because I'm like, it's for your own safety. Like, it's not like they're making you wear a face shield for fun. Like, it's like, in theory, to protect you and potentially protect other people. They make you wear some sort of mask or mouth covering or face covering, whatever. It's to protect you. And thus, like I said, protect other people. It's not just like something they're doing on a whim, which, I mean, they seem to be doing other things on a whim, but this wouldn't be done on a whim if they haven't. So I thought that was wild. I thought it was like, when I first heard about it, I was like, oh, okay, he must be like, if they don't have one, he's not going to play. Then I read it, and I was like, oh, if they do have one, he's not going to play. And I'm like, that is a little crazy to me. Again, to each his own. I'm not going to be the one out there playing, so if I want to be comfortable, or if J.J. Watt wants to be comfortable, I get that. But at the same time, again, this is not like a fashion thing. This is like literally for safety. And you're going to be like, if it's not, like, if we're going to put in extra precautions to be safe, you're just going to be like, I'm good. Because you just hate visors that much. Like, that's kind of interesting. I don't doubt that if they had to do some things like that, people would at least consider dropping out due to the fact that that would mean that it's not safe to be out there. But I don't think they would drop out for this reason. That's an interesting reason. Again, everybody has their own reasons for why they may or may not want to play. I'm not going to tell J.J. Watt what to do. Plus, he's made a lot of money. Like, he'll be fine. He had the like tag show with his brothers. I think he's the one doing the tag, right? Yeah, he's the one doing the tag game show where people run around and like play tag and maybe potentially win money. It's not like the worst show I've ever seen. So there's that. But yeah, so you can have more free time to do stuff like that, I guess, if he wants to take off the season. Though, don't know how it's going to work because of, that Rona. But yeah, I thought that was interesting too. Just like you would just be like, if they have this, I'm not doing it. But yeah, we'll see what other interesting things the NFL decides to whip up for their players and for, I guess under the guise of like safety for this upcoming season, because it's going to be a mess. In my personal opinion. Hopefully, it's a successful mess, and these things can go through and relatively unscathed. But I guess we'll see for real when like MLS and not that they're first sports to come back, but MLS was the first male sport to come back. So we'll see how they do. See how basketball does. See how MLB does. See if the women's soccer league can finish. See how the NHL does. And see how the WNBA does. All before we get to football. So, hopefully by then we'll have an idea of what works, what doesn't, and that will allow the NFL to do things better. But we'll see. I'm not overly optimistic. But I'm I'm just curious at this point. Because again, I got to see how some of these sports leagues kind of start up and if they work or if they don't. That'll either raise or lower my level of optimism for the football season. But as of right now, I'm not all that confident. But we shall see. And speaking of someone that is confident, I imagine Dana White is very confident in what he's doing, because I believe, if I'm correct, on the first fight on that Fight Island that he bought a while ago, that I thought was a good idea. I think you can check the tapes on that for me, but I know some people were kind of like, "This is crazy. Like, this is never going to work." Blah blah blah. Or at least if I didn't think it was going to work, I thought it was at least interesting. But yeah, so I believe the first fight on that Fight Island is going to start this weekend. 251? I don't know. We'll double check that, and we'll talk about it right after the break. So stay right there.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red-hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
GSMC podcast network. So before I get deep into the article, I just want to say that I was right. It was UFC 251. I just had to double check because I thought it was, but I was like, maybe I could be wrong. Comes to find out, I was not wrong. So there is that. Shout out to me for getting that right. But regardless, so the Fight Island. So this is technically it's from AP Sports, but I know the article's on the New York Times, and I'm reading it through the news app via ABC News. Like it's everywhere. I was gonna read through the New York Times, but then you gotta be subscribed, and I'm not subscribed, and all that stuff. So yeah, but regardless, it's just it's an article about the Fight Island and everything that's going on. So obviously back months ago when you first brought this up, people were like, "Oh, this seems like a cool idea," but I don't really know how it's gonna work. And now here we are a few months later, and it has actually come to fruition, and it's ready for competition. And while it may not be exactly what he envisioned originally, it is it's going to work. I think the octagon is inside an air-conditioned arena on Abu Dhabi's Yas Island that also sits inside a bubble that seems highly unlikely to burst. This is again the writing of the AP Sports writer Greg Beecham. I'm not 100% positive. But yeah, so White describes it as the biggest thing he's ever undertaken. I'm always of the mindset that there's a solution for every problem, and obviously the coronavirus pandemic was an unprecedented problem for modern professional sports. But White was able to leverage UFC's advantages in mobility and size to get back into full-scale competition much more quickly than other leagues and tours. White said he never worried about whether he should keep staging shows, but only worried about where he would be allowed to do it and how he could do it safely. The UFC went about 8 weeks, which isn't really, compared to everybody else, is not really that bad, without competition before staging events in Jacksonville, Las Vegas, Jacksonville and Las Vegas, excuse me. But White knew that eventually you're going to run out of U.S. fighters and maybe even potentially places to hold these fights because now things are shutting down, now we're opening back up and everything, so it was going to be a mess. So if there wasn't anywhere that he could make that was going to be easier for the international people, it probably wasn't going to work. So he partnered with his longtime friends in Abu Dhabi's government to create a fight oasis rather than a deserted tropical paradise. Yas Island is a modern tourist destination with amusement parks, malls, and a Formula One racetrack. Dozens of fighters in their camps have already traveled from around the world to Fight Island, where they're relaxing in luxury hotel rooms and training for their shows. Fight Island will host, apparently, 4 UFC events in 14 days, starting with the 3 championship fights at UFC 251 this weekend on Saturday. If you're a UFC fan, tune in. They got Masvidal versus Usman. That should be a good one. I don't know a lot about UFC, but I know that was the one I was going to be interested in if it was going to go down, just because that was the maybe Conor could fight these guys, maybe he couldn't, but now they're just going to fight each other. So it works. And Masvidal doing it on 1 week's notice, because I forget whoever the guy is that had to back out last week against Usman. And Masvidal's like, let me pass the COVID test. He passed, and was like, all right, boom, we in there. And now we got a potentially great fight, again, along with a couple other title fights. So yeah, and although the UFC will return to Las Vegas in August, White told the AP he believes that the UFC will be back at Yas Island repeatedly this year and perhaps beyond. Fight Island is indefinite right now, White said. I love it there. On the trip, I'll probably go looking at either houses or a condo to buy over there. Incredible restaurants, hotels, is a great place. Roughly 6 square miles of the island have been set apart as a safe zone for the roughly 2,000 people involved in the UFC's production over the next 3 weeks. Locals went through a 14-day quarantine, and everyone inside the safe zone has passed several coronavirus tests. The organization is following the same health and safety protocols that appeared to work splendidly over the past 2 months. The promotion has announced only a few positive tests with minimal schedule disruptions and no significant outbreaks. And obviously, it's easier to do it in that sport than it would be in most other team sports, which White did point out in this article that it is a little bit easier because it only has about 20 to 24 athletes in its shows, which are individual events largely run by a well-trained veteran group of employees. and the UFC even handles all their TV production of its own fights for ESPN and its international clients. So yeah, they got a limited amount of people they got to worry about. Again, you have that many that are going to be on or could be on one basketball team on a game. Like you might have 20, 25 guys, or including coaches and training staffs and trainers and doctors and things like that. Plus, again, the actual people on the roster. You might have 25 guys just for one team, and there's 22 teams down there. And again, don't even get me started on the NFL and how many people they have. I mean, again, it's not like it's a new thing, but I'm just saying in these times, having less is more, or there's better, I guess I could say. It's a lot better for a situation like this where you're going to have to be dealing with potentially a virus that's very easy to pass on to other people. Let me just say that. So again, the limited amount of people makes things easier, and that's why the UFC, even though they've had to cancel fights here and there, they've never really had a major outbreak, nor have they ever had to cancel an event, I think. Even if they have to cancel, sometimes they get people on short notice, sometimes they just push it back. I'd say it's kind of worked out for the UFC. And also it's one of those things where they kind of had to at least attempt to do this. The UFC is bolstered by its $1.5 billion rights deal with ESPN and its pay-per-view income, which is likely to be robust this summer due to the fact that all their fights are on ESPN Plus. Well, if you have that service, then plus they're on pay-per-view. And there's literally nothing else to watch. So you're going to get a lot of pay-per-view numbers. Again, you're not getting the same numbers as you would have with fans and concessions and all those things. Because I imagine those fights can go for a lot of money, especially the big name fights. That's why guys like Conor and John Jones and those type of guys were saying that they're not going to do it. Because again, I imagine their money is not going to be at that same level that it would be due to the fact that there's other mitigating costs. But it's easy to... if it was possible, they're going to put it on. It's the same thing that you're seeing now with boxing, where a lot of you saw Top Rank has had stuff on ESPN. I know DAZN and Matchroom, they're coming back with some fights. So just in the sports where, all right, we can have a finite amount of people in one area at the same time and try to keep it a little bit under wraps, it makes sense to try. And that's why I said UFC was always going to at least try. And I know Dana White seemed a little crazy at first, but now it's been working. And it's just one of those things where it's just they've honestly kind of been one of the leaders, as they put in this article, the leaders in the sports world since the pandemic started. Even though Dana White still has a few doubts about most experts' recommendations on public health. And then we're not talking about the mask thing, but yeah, he has his own doubts. But in the idea of all right, can we do sports in this time? Everyone's looking at the UFC and being like, if you do it right, it's possible. And I said the UFC is doing it right, which has been their benefit, is that they haven't done anything too crazy, they haven't done anything too out of the ordinary, and they've been on top of their testing. They're testing people, and immediately if someone tested, they're just taking them out, and then that fight's not going down potentially. And that's a smart thing to do. If the minute any of you have a positive case, you just isolate them. And then, like I said, then you hope it doesn't spread. And that's kind of why they've been able to have, I don't know how many events they've had over the last few months. Or I guess it was 8 weeks off. They had their first thing in probably late May. I think they had it in April, May, sometime like that. So, their first event. So I'm saying, over this time, they put, I don't know how many events they put on, but it's been a pretty big, or pretty good amount. And like I said, outside of a few tests here and there, positive tests here and there, it's been run pretty smooth. So I would be shocked if this Fight Island doesn't work, because now you're in an area where, again, as long as no one brings it in to the island, then you're good. Because in theory, you're testing everyone on top of stuff. No one should have it. And again, it's hard to say for certain because the symptoms, I don't know exactly when it's detectable, especially if you're asymptomatic with this thing, because normally symptoms can happen between anywhere 2 to 3 to 14 days. It's the incubation period. But if you don't have any symptoms, then I don't know when it would be detectable. Stuff like that, because normally that's the easiest way to start detecting is oh, I feel this or I feel that. kind of thing. But yeah, just like this Fight Island thing should work, and like I said, this makes sense to have as a thing going forward. It's like, all right, if this is successful and it works out as most of the other events have worked out, then it's like, why not continue to have things here? And then now once you can have fans and you can get more money that way, because again, it sounds like there's stuff to do on the island, so it's not like people wouldn't want to go there if they could. Then all right, then you can continue to make money here. It's like, why just only use it for the pandemic if it works? That part of it makes total sense. I would be shocked if this year, or I guess even into 2021 is the only time they use this. It just seems like if it works and it's safe and and it's reasonable to maintain and use, then it's like, why not continue to do it? Which I think the UFC will end up doing. But hey, we shall see. So like I said, so maybe AP Sports is an interesting it's an interesting article to read about just kind of how Dana White got here and how we got here, just in terms of like how we took it from this kind of like crazy idea to like, oh, this is actually a thing and it's probably going to work in a few short months. But we're here now, so we'll see how that goes. But speaking of the actual event, like I said, you got Usman versus Masvidal in the main event, welterweight title fight. You got Max Holloway versus Alexander Volkanovski. I don't know if I said that right. But that's in the featherweight title fight. Petr Yan versus Jose Aldo. Don't want to pronounce it wrong, not 100% sure. But that's the bantamweight, that's title fights. So like I said, they got the 3 title fights. Boom, 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 like that. And they got a couple women's fights. The Amanda Ribas against Paige Van Zandt, I think it was. I know I've seen her on Instagram. And don't know why she's the only one. Well, not, I know a couple other women fighters, but I know she's one of the ones that I am aware of. I forget, was she pregnant or something not that long ago? I don't know. But then you got that. You got Jessica Andrade versus Rose Namajunas. Hopefully I pronounced that right. But yes, you got a couple other fights obviously on the undercard and stuff. But it should be those are just the pay-per-view fights. But yeah, it should be an interesting event. And obviously the Usman versus Masvidal, that's clearly going to be the big one. But that's the thing about a lot of these events, is that some of the lower level fights have been just as good. Especially some of the women fights from what not that I've watched a lot of them, but just I try to keep up on things or keep track of things on Twitter. So a lot of these lower on the card fights, or especially the women's fights, have been great over these past weeks and months that the UFC has been putting on events. And I would like to think this shouldn't be any different. And that's the thing, where I think people are talking about this with the bubble, or I've talked about this with the bubble, but also it's kind of thing with the UFC and why they've been successful and people still care. You can have this thing on the Fight Island, is that the fights themselves have been good. And I think that's really what it comes down to at the end of the day, is that these bubbles and these plans or whatever are going to be judged by A, or do you have any outbreaks within your organization or within your league? That'll be one. And then 2, or I said A. And then B will be, is the product good? Because the bubble is only going to be as successful as the product, assuming, again, they don't have to shut down again. But if they don't have to shut down but the product's bad, then the bubble was a disaster. But if they don't have to shut down and the product is good, then everyone's like, look, the NBA is genius, NBA is so smart, everything. And I think that's kind of the way the UFC has done, is that when they've had cases pop up, they can get the people out. They don't have them around anybody anymore. But then also with that, the fights have been good, so now you want to tune in. And now you can have it on this Fight Island because everyone's really intrigued and really wants to see fights continue to go on because people are watching. And like I said, if the fights were bad, then people would be like, all right, well, we really don't care. Or they still might care because there's, again, nothing to watch. But when things come back and there's stuff to watch, they might not care anymore. And I think people are still going to care about the UFC. I mean, not that, again, they have a loyal fan base, so obviously people care. But you get my point, is that the casual person that's only watching now because they can, because there's nothing else on, may still be like, all right, I've become intrigued by this and I want to keep up with it. And that's where they lucked out, is they were one of the few sports going on, and they were able to do something and make sure that it was good, which is what baseball could have done if they, if the owners weren't being, if they weren't just trying to get as much money as they could, which again, that's how rich people stay rich, so I'm not going to judge. But that's what they could have been doing, is gaining some fans maybe that they wouldn't have had, or gain intrigue into their league that maybe they wouldn't have had before. And I think that's where the UFC's at, is where now everyone's, I'm not saying everyone, but like people are like tuning in that may not have been tuning in before and are intrigued by this idea of the Fight Island and all this other stuff. I mean, like I said, I'm not a big UFC guy, but I knew about Usman, knew about Masvidal. Like, I'm not going to say for certain if I'm going to buy the pay-per-view yet, or if I find a way to watch it in a different manner. But, maybe if somebody else's, like, login information, something like that. Don't do that. But, I'm just saying. Who knows? But regardless, I'm just saying, like, I'm intrigued. I want to see how this Fight Island event goes. Like, just generally, maybe that's just me, because I'm a general sports fan, but obviously you guys are all sports fans out there listening. So you're also intrigued by just random sports things. And this is, if you're not a mixed martial arts guy, this is just like a random sports thing to you, or an Ultimate Fighter guy, this is just a sports thing to you. But at the same time, it's intriguing, because you're like, oh, I'm curious to see how this event on a tropical, or just, I don't know how tropical it is, but just like on this island, specific island built for this, how's it going to look, and how's it going to work, and how it's going to go. Like I said, we'll find out all of that this weekend on Saturday. So if you're, I don't know how all your states are doing with the opening up and what there is and is to do, or maybe what there isn't to do. But yeah, if you're not doing much, I'd say at least, like, I don't know, maybe you go and, like, split the pay-per-view. I don't know if you want to drop the whole 60, 70, whatever it is. Because pay-per-views can be expensive. Or if you know somebody that has the ESPN Plus, just have them slide through the log and stuff like that so you can watch the fight. Because, like I said, Usman versus Masvidal is probably going to be the big one I talked about. But like I mentioned, some of these undercard, quote-unquote, fights have been just sometimes even better than the main event. And from what I've been seeing and hearing on the social media. So, just maybe want to tune in a little early. Make sure you get some of the earlier fights. Especially, like I said, the women fights have been really good recently. It seems like so. Yeah, maybe see some of them. Again, if it's not your thing, it's not your thing. But if you want something to watch on Saturday, this might be it. So, stay tuned in. And speaking of things to watch, or things that we did watch in the past, I believe Wednesday was the 10-year anniversary of the decision. Obviously, LeBron deciding to take his talents to South Beach. So I want to talk about that. Talk about kind of what I remember about the decision, kind of what I remember about the fallout from the decision and the reaction to it, and also how that really changes the way we view free agency, not only in basketball, but I think free agency in general. Personally, again, I was, I guess, in high school at the time, so this is like most of my like knowledgeable fandom about sports was like a little before and then post decision. So maybe my views are jaded, and you can correct me if I'm wrong or debate me if you think I'm wrong. But that's just how I feel, and we'll talk about how I feel about the decision right after the break. So stay right there.
Are you looking to get your college football fix? Looking to get the latest news on your favorite school's team? The GSMC College Football Podcast is your ticket to all things college football. Join us as we talk college football from the national championship, the college rivalries, the bowl game, to the Heisman Trophy. To which conference is the best? We've got you covered for the Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, the Pac-12, ACC, and everything in between. Download the GSMC College Football Podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play, or anywhere you find podcasts. Just type GSMC in the search bar.
We are back the decision. The infamous video, or not, I don't want to say video conference, the infamous television special that had us waiting around for, I think it was like an hour, if I remember correctly. But just had us waiting around to see where LeBron was going to take his talents, and he ended up taking them, obviously, to South Beach, joined by, well, I guess D-Wade was already technically there, but he was a free agent, but then Chris Bosh came along, and then, you know how it goes. They had the little pep rally, not 5, not 6, not 7. They win 2 championships, blow it to the Mavs in the first year. He called us all broke afterwards, which is still one of my favorite LeBron moments ever, because I was definitely a hater at that time. We'll get into that. And then, obviously, then it ends with them getting smoked. The Spurs ran circles around them in, what was that, 2014? And then LeBron leaves, goes back to Cleveland, wins the championship there, and then, you know the rest. But yeah, the decision. I think, I believe they had a docu-series that came out, or the ESPN documentary that came out. I didn't watch it. Unfortunately, I have to go back in and watch it. They explored the decision and like all the behind-the-scenes stuff and like how it came about and all that stuff. But just going to the decision itself, because I will have to watch that, and I'll get back to you guys when I do, with some of the tea, as the children like to say, about like the decision and everything that went on around it. But it's like what I remember from that time was, one, I really thought he was going to the Bulls, and it seems like the Bulls were a high option, but then they didn't. Him and Joakim Noah didn't really get along at the time. It would have been weird. And then apparently, if I remember some of the details that have come out, was that they also weren't, I guess, like thrilled that D-Wade didn't really recruit them. I mean, not D-Wade. D-Rose didn't really recruit them to come to the team. But again, this was like, he wasn't really, that's just like, hey, either you want to come to Chicago or you don't. I'm not going to be here, try to pitch you on. Obviously now that's literally all you have now is all these pitch meetings and different things. And speaking of, I think it was during like the Knicks that apparently they were the first choice, which again makes some semblance of sense, seeing as he ended up going to the Lakers for no real reason other than to be in LA and again obviously play on an eventually a good team, but that team that he went to originally was playoff caliber, but that wasn't. Well, I mean, it was better than the last Cavs team, so there is that. But it seemed like New York and the Knicks is where he wanted to go originally. And then obviously they had the weird meeting and they brought some of the Sopranos stars in there, which is like pretty funny when you think about it, but also like a very James Dolan thing to have like random non-basketball related things to try to pitch him on basketball, especially since The Sopranos is a show based in New Jersey. So that makes it even more weird. And who even knows if like LeBron liked this, or like unless you knew LeBron was like a huge Sopranos fan, it's like that doesn't move people. So in an unshocking development, the Knicks fumbled the bag for, the upteenth time. But yeah, so when you talk about decision, I remember the one thing I was mad about was the fact that it took so long. Because that's kind of the beauty of free agency now-ish, is that, outside of the top guys, which we'll talk about, they all take their time, but generally speaking, like that first night, like there's stuff happening in all sports. But that first night, there's stuff happening, so you don't really have to wait around that long. And that was the thing. It was like LeBron and his decision was like the biggest thing. Like where he was going to go. Because again, he was the best player in the league at the time. So obviously where he was going to go was a big deal. Then they were making a TV special and it was this whole thing. And so yeah, I just remember that kind of annoyed me. And then obviously the not 5, not 6, not 7, because they were just like, they just thought it was going to be the easiest thing ever, which as he found out and other people have found out, they try to form these super teams. Like, it's just not that simple. There's still games to be played, still games to be won. You don't win games on paper. You have to roll the ball out and do it. And again, there was the whole drama with the Heat earlier in the season. That first year where he bumped Spoelstra, that was a whole mess. It was really, the whole thing was a mess. But yes, and he goes to Miami and he does that, and then like I said, it goes. He has his first year, they get to the finals, lose to the Mavs, and again, I don't want to touch on this, because it was just funny because everyone was hating on him that whole year, me and myself included, because I was just like, I don't like. who's LeBron? Like, who does LeBron think he is? Like, I don't want to see him win. Plus, like, I was a Thunder fan I'm still am a Thunder fan, but I was a Thunder fan at the time. Like, I didn't really care about the Cavs or anybody in the East. I was worried about seeing my new stars in KD and Russ and Serge and James Harden get ready to take over the lead. Obviously, I was wrong. Shout out Sam Presti and the Thunder ownership that decided, yeah, let's just trade our third best player. Even though I'm kind of going off a little bit here, but they win that. I think they get back to the finals that year if Pat Beverly doesn't like purposely try to injure Russell Westbrook in the first series. I promise you, they were like the best team in the West that year. They had the number 1 point differential. Again, Kevin Martin wasn't James Harden, but like he was fine. And again, if Pat Bev doesn't do that, I think Thunder history is looked at a little bit differently personally. But hey, we'll never know. But yes, and the Heat go through that, get to the finals. They play the Mavs, and then they lose after being up, and then they mocked Dirk too. So it was just like everybody was just rooting for not the Heat. And then when they won, it was fun to rejoice in that moment. And then, like I said, yeah, LeBron called everybody broke and said we all have to go back to our terrible lives, and he'll be living a great life even though we just lost the finals. And I was like, wow, he's right. I was hating because I wasn't LeBron, and I was like, that's when it first started to turn for me. It's like I'm not a LeBron hater anymore. But then I hated him again because he beat the Thunder the next year. But then eventually I decided not to hate him. But so then obviously we know the immediate ramifications of the decision on his career and on the careers of some other guys. Because obviously I don't know if Chris Bosh wins a championship without LeBron being on that team. I don't know if Ray Allen wins another championship if he doesn't go down to the Miami team. I don't know if D Wade, who knows if they go to Chicago or they go to New York, how things turn out. Especially since they had the good structure with Pat Riley, and then we obviously know now Eric Spoelstra's a good coach and everything. So who knows how things would have gone with that. But so separate from just LeBron, some of the ramifications from that decision, or from the decision, I should say, is that now, like I said, free agency is a spectacle. And he's kind of the one that ushered us into that territory where, like, again, now every time there's a big free agent, it doesn't matter what sport, in my opinion. Again, basketball is the biggest spectacle, but even in football, you're waiting around, you're refreshing your Twitter feed, you're going through, you have like Adam Schefter's notifications turned on, or when NBA free agency is happening, you have Woj tweets like notifications turned on, or you have Shams tweet notifications turned on, or like Mark Stein or Chris Haynes, any of these guys. Now it's like a thing, like where people are like, again, they have free agency specials and stuff like all day to see like where people go and all that stuff and talk about where people have gone and keep us up to date on things. Same thing they do with like the trade deadline, but which again, it became a spectacle partly because of LeBron too, because he was out there just trading everybody all the time. But it was a little bit of a spectacle before then too. But yeah, so he just kind of turned into, now it's like, this is, you and honest, some people could argue that's better than the season. To them. Again, not to everybody, but to them. They're like, alright, the season's cool, but my team, sorry, I could care less. But I'm interested to see like what happens in free agency and where these guys go and who gets the big money. I still remember the summer of 2016 when the cap jumped, even though KD went to the Warriors and that ruined my 4th of July that year. A shout out to him for that, because we were just blowing up my phone. But yeah, so like when Timofey Mozgov and like I think it was like Luol Deng and all these like Bismack Biyombo, Nick Batum, all these random guys just getting big deals. It didn't matter who they were; you were locked in. As soon as 12-1 hit, you're on Twitter, you got ESPN on, you're doing whatever just to see like what's going on. And I said that's part of that is because of LeBron, and he turned it into a spectacle, in my opinion. And he made it so that now free agency is like literally like must see TV. Like you have to. Everyone's so interested. Everyone wants to know, like, who's going to be where. It's now becoming like a big thing where people talk about it. Again, that whole season. Even like his last season, like you saw the kid run up and hug him about come returning to Cleveland. It was like a big deal. And KD's last year, it was a big deal. And in both OKC and in Golden State, it was a big deal. Obviously, a big talking point. Like I said, that's because of LeBron. Now, and not to say that free agency wasn't a big deal before then, but just like in my lifetime, that's when I feel like it turned, and now everyone's like, it's like, all right, now we are locked in. Like we discussed free agency for the entire year, basically, And then, like I said, as soon as whatever, the July 1st, I think is the official date, and then obviously have the moratorium and stuff. But when July 1st is, you see people taking pitch meetings. Like, again, you got people flying to the Hamptons, you got people going here, you got people going there. Even Kawhi, and he's not even a big talker. He still had a big free agency, I guess I don't want to say tour, but like pitch meetings. And like I said, and LeBron was really the first one because he had the meeting with the Bulls, he had the meeting with the Knicks, he had the meeting with the Heat. And like I said, before, just like, all right, you might get some calls, but I don't know how many like big meetings where people are like, all right, they're meeting with this team on this day and they're meeting with that team on that day. Like, a part of that, in my opinion, why that's become such a big deal now is because of LeBron. Same thing if Giannis ever becomes a free agent, or if Anthony Davis decides to be a free agent after this year. Like, whoever they meet with, wherever they go, whatever teams they talk to, it's going to be all over the place. And it's going to be like everyone's going to be locked into the TV to see what happens with that. I said a lot of that is LeBron, in my opinion. And then now that is because of LeBron and because of the decision. Also, I feel like he gave the players the power to feel like they can control their own career. Like, I don't think KD goes to the Warriors if LeBron doesn't make the decision and go to the Heat. And by that I mean, like, he was the first. I'm not saying he was the first because everyone's trying to win championships. But he was the first one to make it like a big deal and being like, all right, look, I want to do what's best for my basketball legacy. And at the time, it was not staying in Cleveland. Because again, they weren't a good free agent destination. They weren't making the necessary moves. He wanted things like that, and he was just willing to up and leave and meet up with some people he was cool with, and then they play basketball and then won some championships. And like I said, that's what KD did to a different degree because again, the Heat didn't beat the Cavs in the playoffs the year before in the Western Conference Finals or the Eastern Conference Finals when they were up 3-1. So it's a little different. But still, like the idea behind it is the same. Where it's like, all right, I'm going to make the best decision for me and my legacy. Granted, people don't really respect it that much, but that's neither here nor is it there. I don't think 20 years from now people aren't really going to remember that. It's going to be like, oh yeah, KD has such and such amount of rings. All right, cool. But yeah, like I'm saying, I think that they empower the same thing with Kawhi. Like, I don't know if Kawhi takes that meeting with the Clippers and is like, unless you bring me Paul George, I'm not coming. I don't know if he feels that empowered to be like, look, I want to do this on my terms. And if my terms mean I need XYZ players with me, then you're going to have to bring XYZ players with me if you want me on your team. And I said that's kind of how the LeBron decision went. Like, he was like, look, I want to go somewhere with D-Wade and we want to team up with Bosh. Hey, look, wherever I go, that's what we're going to need. If you're not going to do that for us, then I'm not going. And that's like, I ended up in Miami. Like, again, they took less money to do it too, but I'm just saying, like that moment in time is been big, and then like I said, it's spread out to other sports. When you're talking about football and other things, like situations are a little bit different because not as many people are going on these big, grandiose meetings, and also in football, not that many guys, not that many big names. Like, no LeBron level players ever made it to free. I guess, well, Tom Brady, that was really like the biggest one. And even his thing wasn't really like that big of a deal because it was like once he was in the Patriots, there was only like so many places he could go. Like, LeBron literally could have gone to, I would think about, due to cap ramifications, probably not every team, but like I think every team at least tried to call him. And they're like, look, hey, like we'll give you a meeting if you want one, and he's like, no, you can't afford me. Click. But yeah, I just think like that moment in time was very pivotal for the athlete, and like the player movement and everything that's kind of how you've seen happen in the league and in sports over the last 5 to 10 years. A lot of that was because of what LeBron decided to do and got a backlash for. But I mean, hey, somebody's got to take those arrows, and shout out to LeBron for doing that because now people can just do whatever they want and go wherever they want and make all sorts of demands and take all sorts of fancy meetings and do all this other stuff. I don't know if people were doing back in the days. Or back in the day. But I know now, if arguably one of the biggest athletes in the world can do that, then like, all right, yeah, no, I think I could do that. I could do it. So yeah. So decision, again, at the time, was it bad? Yeah, probably didn't need to make a TV special out of it. But the like, I don't want to call it a domino effect, but like the things that have come from it have been great and only add to LeBron's legacy, in my opinion, for what he's done both on the court and off the court, whether it's for players or whether it's just for the average citizen. And speaking of that, and his legacy and his place all time, Kenny Smith from the TNT team, Kenny the Jet Smith, had some interesting comments about where LeBron ranks in his all-time, like, top 10 or whatever. And also some interesting comments about the league and the way in which it is played today, in terms of like the spacing and all that stuff, and the offense, and all the gaudy numbers. So we discussed that and what he had to say right after this break. Stay right there.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC, Invicta FC, Bellator, and One Championship. We got the fights covered. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts. Past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
So, Kenny Smith. Now, as I have often said, I've even said it a few times on this podcast, I hate the argument that, oh, if you didn't play the sport, you shouldn't talk about it. You know why? Because a lot of people that played the sport have terrible opinions just like the rest of us. And in theory, their opinions should be better because they played the sport. They understand what goes on. Blah, blah, blah. And yet, here we are, with them having terrible opinions again and again. I mean, just look at Kendrick Perkins. Need I say more? But yeah, so I'm not just going to single out Kendrick Perkins, because he's not the only one. A lot of people across a lot of sports have bad opinions that played in the sport. Like, that literally, to me, means nothing, because you don't have to have played the sport to understand what you're seeing. Like, you may not know the exact terminology, you may not understand completely if or why something's happening, but you can see something that's good and you can see something that's bad. You can be like, alright, like, I could take somebody having never watched football before, and you could watch Patrick Mahomes playing, like, oh, that guy's good. And then I could tell him, I could have him watch, again, I don't want to single out anybody to try to be disrespectful, but I could have him watch, let's just go, like, worst of the worst. The Nathan Peterman game where he ended up getting benched at halftime, whatever, who threw all those picks. Like, you can just be like, alright, you shouldn't be doing that. Now, again, the in-between stuff is where you have to be more in tune with the game or with the sport to kind of figure out the details. But the same thing when you watch, like a LeBron or an Anthony Davis. Like, when you watch them, when you watch the Lakers or the Bucks or the Clippers or those type of... the Clippers, they don't always be trying that hard. They really just be going through the motions, personally. But still, you can kind of tell, you're like, alright, this team is good. Or the way they play basketball, just like any of the peak, like, Warriors teams, you're like, alright, this is good basketball. Or they're really good at whatever this is. And you, again, not to be disrespectful, put on a Knicks game, and you're like, ooh, okay, this is not that. So again, you don't need to understand the sport or have played the sport to see what's good and what's bad. The nuance is where, again, the better you understand the sport, the more knowledge you're able to talk with. But when it comes to what Kenny Smith had to say, I mean, it's just almost outright blasphemy. He was on, I think it was a Load Management podcast which I believe is done through Complex. So he was on there. They had him as a guest, which, I mean, shout out to them for getting him as a guest. He was talking about his all-time players list, and I didn't... You could watch... I mean, I guess you could watch or listen to the whole podcast. Once I heard these little snippets, I was like, all right, I'm good. I don't need to listen to this foolishness. No offense. I was like, yeah, no, this isn't the one for me, personally. But yeah, so he was talking about like his top 5 or his top 10, and they asked him about like LeBron. He's like, oh yeah, he's in there at 10, possibly. And everyone was like, what? And he's like, yeah, no, he's down there at 10. And they asked him with Kobe, because usually when people, a lot of guys, they're either like Kobe guys or like LeBron guys, which, I mean, RIP Kobe. But, I mean, I think now people have like tapered back from that. Like, you're not just going to hate on the guy just because. Or the opposite guy just because. But yeah, Kobe at 11. So he wasn't even one of those situations where I know one of my friends, he just grew up with Kobe because he's like from the Caribbean. So that's kind of, the Lakers were who you could see. And that's why a lot of like, I don't know, there's a couple, when I was down in the Bahamas, slight flex. This was a couple years ago, but the one waiter we were talking to who was like from the Bahamas, like his favorite player was like Kobe, and he couldn't stand LeBron. And I'm just like, and knowing my other friend, he's from the Cayman Islands, and it was a similar thing. Like I guess it's just like the Caribbean. That's who you got. You got the Lakers, and if you got the Lakers and you're below the age of 30, then you're probably a Kobe fan. Or you watch, and that's the only team you can watch, like, you're definitely a Kobe fan. So, yeah, LeBron, that's a different story. So, it wasn't even like Kenny Smith was like one of those, where he just like, alright, I have Kobe high. Like, no, he had Kobe at 11 too. So, let me just start with that. He said he had LeBron at 10, all time. That, in and of itself, complete and utter foolishness. Now, this probably won't come as a surprise to you guys that I'm complaining about something again. But, at the same time, like, I just have to call it like I see it. And when I see foolishness, I like to talk about it. I mean, that's what I do in real life with my friends and my family. So I figured, might as well do it on the podcast. But yeah, it's just that, like, how, in what universe is LeBron the 10th best player of all time? When he's easily the best small forward ever. I mean, and I don't know, he probably had, like, I know he had, like, Larry Bird and some of these other guys, like Magic, Kareem, probably had, like, Bill Russell, Wilt, some of those guys in there. And again, I already told you guys my opinion about everybody that played in black and white. They're out of my ranking all the time. Well, they're out of my GOAT ranking. Again, I'm not going to say I'm not going to have Bill Russell in my top 10. Well, it's a little different story because, again, how his numbers always good, but then he can't beat Bill. I mean, again, Bill Russell was an athletic freak in his own right too, the same as Wilt. But like, come on, you got to beat him like more than once, bro. Like, come on, like how's that possible? You average all these points. I still don't. This is a separate thing I'm not going to get into. I still don't believe that 100-point game is true, but. Well, maybe we'll get into that on a different podcast. But yeah, so he's probably had those type of guys in there. But I'm just like, there's no universe in which you have watched the history of basketball in this country and been like, there's definitively 9 guys better than LeBron at basketball. You just, I don't see how you say that. When you talk about all the things he can do on the offensive end, from scoring. Again, he's not necessarily a lights-out shooter, but like he can hit the 3. Rebounding, his passing ability for a non-point guard is probably the best ever. I mean, if you listen to the way his teammates talk about that capacity, like he literally, like he like asked them or talks to them about how they like to shoot, so that he can pass them the ball right in their shooting pocket, so they don't like they go up with as little movement as possible and make it easier for them. And that's why you surround himself with some great shooters. Ray Allen, Kyle Korver, J.R. Smith when he's hot. That's just like recently, obviously. But yeah, no, he's had some great shooters around him because he had like Mike Miller on those Heat teams, like just like I think he had like Rashard Lewis on one of those teams. I know Shane Battier hit all those threes, or mainly he just hit a lot of threes against the Thunder. Though I don't know about the other years, but against the Thunder he was really good. That really annoyed me. But yeah, just like his passing ability for a non-point guard is sensational. Easily the best from a big guy, like a big, obviously like above 6'3", 6'4" guy since Magic. Obviously, Magic was the original, but again, LeBron's more athletic, better defender, bigger. I don't know if he's taller, but like he's stronger, faster. At 35, he is arguably still the best player in the league when many people thought he was eventually going to drop off, especially after last year coming off the injury. So it's like, in what universe? Again, if you don't have him as the GOAT, or you don't want to have him above like Kareem, alright. I disagree on the Kareem thing, but I won't argue with you. I think MJ is the GOAT, but I think he's solidly number 2. But to have him at 10, possibly, to where that means he could go lower, like, how does that make any sort of sense? Like, I wanted to listen to the podcast just so that I could hear his logic behind why there's 9 guys better than LeBron and who the 9 guys were, but I just was going to get annoyed. So I was like, I don't want to bring that sort of negativity into my life right now, especially when we're in a world where there's already enough negativity going on around with the pandemic and like the social unrest and everything that's going on in this country. It's just like, I want to watch and listen to things that like uplift me and uplift my spirit and not bring me down. So I was like, I can't do that. And so that was I didn't understand that at all. I was like, you can't tell me Larry Bird's better than LeBron James. I'm sorry. With a straight face, you can't do it. I won't believe you. And like, unless you're a Celtics fan. If you're a Celtics fan, then I still wouldn't agree, but I'll get it. But Kenny he played for the Rockets. So like, I don't know if that's the only team he played for, but I know it's the prominent team he played for. He played for the Rockets. Like, come on, bro. And you watch, like, his job is literally to watch basketball every night. Like, he has to because of inside the NBA. Like, how could you watch basketball every night and be like, yeah, I don't know about LeBron, bro. I don't know. He just, something about him. Just like, what? Like, how does that make any sort of sense? I'm not saying you have to say he's the GOAT, but to have him at 10, blasphemy. And then the blasphemy did not end there. He also decided to say that if he were in the league today, he would average closer to 25, 26. And I would just like to point out that if I go to Kenny Smith's basketball reference page, shout out to Basketball Reference, he averaged 12.8 points for his career, and the highest amount of points he ever scored in a season was 17.7, which came in 90-91. So even on those championship teams in 93, 94, 94, 95, he only averaged 11 and 10 points. And he did preface that by saying that he wasn't really a scorer. He did shoot decent from 3, though. I'll give him that. Shot almost 40% for his career. Only shot 2.3 attempts, but 40% from his career at that point where no one was really shooting 3 like that, that's not bad. Shot 43% one year, 40% another year, 42.9 another year, so 43.7 again his last year in the league. So, again, good shooter. But scorer, not so much. And that's my other thing when I hate, and that's why it's hard to compare eras when you do this type of stuff, because everyone from that era is always like, oh, you can't hand check. You can't hand check. And like, oh, the game's more physical and stuff like that. And I'm just like, while it is true there's no more hand checking. One, hand checking makes it easier, literally makes it easier to defend. In my opinion. Everyone's like, oh, it's so much easier to score now because you can't hand check. Like, if I can just put my hand on you and like restrict your movement, that makes it harder for the offense. Which again is why what MJ was doing was so impressive. But like, that's the easier way to defend. Like, defending now, I understand like why, like, it doesn't take a whole lot of skill. I'm saying it didn't take a whole lot of skill. Like, there were no good defenders back there. I'm not trying to say that, because guys like Gary Payton and other guys, like, they were really good defenders. MJ, Scotty, like, they were really good defenders. But I'm saying, because you can't hand check, now you have to be good, like good with lateral quickness, good with anticipation, things like that, because you can't just like influence where they go by putting your hand on them, or where they can't go by putting your hand on them. You literally have to. I mean, not that you can't like touch them a little bit, but you can't just like literally be like, I'm going to hand check. Like, you can't do that anymore. So now, because of that, guys have had to adapt and become better defenders in space. So I'm saying you act like everyone is just scoring 30 plus points a game. Like, that's not a thing. Like, the great players are doing that. The James Hardens of the world, the Steph Currys, KDs. I think Giannis is up to 30 this year. But I'm saying, like, there's a finite amount of people that are scoring like that on a nightly basis. It's not like everyone's just averaging 25 points a game and every game's 150 to 145. Like, are there games like that? Yes. But that's just not how it works. Like, even, alright, I know James Harden is average. Like, yeah, Giannis this year is only averaging 29.6, which is close to 30, but still. So I'm looking at Steph Curry, the greatest shooter of all time. He has only averaged 30 points in his career once, and that was in 2015-2016, arguably the best offensive season any of us have ever seen, where he shot 45% from 3. Because, I mean, why not? Shot 90% from the free throw line, 50% from the field. Again, arguably one of the best offensive seasons in the history of the game. Averaged almost 7 assists, 2.1 steals. But yeah, it's just that, like, alright, like, even he, the greatest shooter of all time, has only averaged 30 points one time. It's not just like it's that easy to score, because, again, everyone has to be so much better and so much sounder defensively because you can't hand check. Like, so now people have to literally improve their actual defense, like their lateral agility, their quickness, their, like I said, their anticipation, their cutting people off, they have to be smarter to be like, alright, I want to force him this way so I can come on my help defense, things like that. Like, you could, like, when you could just hand check, alright, I'm just going to put my hand on you and restrict where you can go, and, like, in my opinion, that's easier. If you could literally hand check people, it would be easier to defend them. Since, like, you can't touch them, you have, like, no way of influencing where they go or how they move. In my opinion, that makes it a lot harder, and that's why when you have guys like the Ben Simmons and Anthony Davises and the Giannis's and the Draymonds and the Kawhis and the Paul Georges of the world, the Jimmy Butlers of the world, that are really good defenders, it's like you see what they do, and I'm just like, how can you just say, all right, yeah, I can score on that just because they're not hand checking? Like, come on. Matisse Thybulle, as a rookie, a great perimeter defender. Kenny would have issues with him. I'm sorry. I don't know how many issues or how much issues, or how big of an issue it would be. But again, he's gonna struggle. What's he gonna do when there's a switch and Paul George is on him now? Or Kawhi's on him now? He's still going to average 25, 26 a game? Like, come on, Kenny. That's the thing, and that's just not a him thing. That's like an older generation thing. They think because there was hand checking and you could, like, literally assault people on the court. Like, now, since you can't do that, it's easier to score. Like, no. Because that defense has had to get better, in my opinion. Obviously, offense has got better, too. By pure... Well, one, evolution, but just like because the defenses have to get better and you have to defend in different ways, the offensive game had to adapt. And that's why you see more speed, more pace and space, stuff like that to try to manipulate it so that there's more room to operate. And also you kind of operate before defenses get set up. That kind of thing. Just like if you're moving quickly and you're pushing the ball up the floor, you don't have time for the defense to set up and get everybody on the right people. So now you can exploit those mismatches. I'm going to exploit those mismatches. Mismatches. Excuse me. Mismatches. Not that hard, Chris. Mismatches. But yeah, so you can do that now, and that's what I'm saying. I don't like when older guys are just like, oh, it's so easy to score, so easy to score, I can do this, I can do that. If it's so easy to score, then why aren't there like 40 players averaging 25 points? There are a lot of players that are doing that. I will give you that. But there's not like 40 players, I don't think. Hopefully I'm right about that are averaging like 40 points. It's not like, again, I know it's not like 15, 20 players that are averaging, I was talking about 25. There's not like 15, 20 players that are averaging 30. There's a select few people that are that skilled. And even like the James Hardens of the world, a lot of his stuff comes at the free throw line because he just like figured out like, all right, I'm not the most athletic, I'm not the most physically gifted, but I'm going to be the most intellectual and exploit a weakness that hasn't been figured out in defenses, and that's drawing fouls. Because of the anticipation, because you kind of got to guess, there's a lot of guesswork involved, because you don't know where people are going. They make a move, and you kind of want to like, try to block it or try to get in the way, and then, all right, boom, you get a foul, he gets a shot up, and now he's at the free throw line shooting too, and he's knocking down like 85, 90%, something like that. So yeah, it's just, I don't know what Kenny was talking about. And again, it's just further proof that you don't need to have watched the sport to know what you're talking about. Because people that watch or played the sports know what you're talking about. Because a lot of people that play the sports, and it's not just basketball, it's football too. Some of their analysts are bad that played the sport. Like, you don't, like, it's just, I don't know. I mean, I'm almost more shocked by the 25, 26 points thing than I am about the LeBron thing. Because everyone, like, grades all-time stuff differently and stuff, so I'm like, alright, having him at 10 is wild, but, like, you can maybe make a rationale. Just be like, alright, yeah, I would average such and such amount of points. So, like, when they're talking about Kobe, like, Jordan would average, like, 40 or 50 or whatever. I'm like, no, he wouldn't. I'm sorry. Jordan's the GOAT, but he wouldn't average 50. Like, come on, people. Like, you sound ridiculous. But hey, maybe you think I sound ridiculous. And if you do, and there's things that you want to refute from me, you want to debate me on, you can do that. You can find us on social media, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. I'm always more than happy to talk and chat and debate and discuss sports with you guys. At the end of the day, we're all sports fans. We all have different opinions. And everybody's entitled to their opinion, whether it's right or wrong. Because there are wrong opinions out there. I just want to point that out. But yeah, if you think that, hey, if you think maybe LeBron isn't in the top 5, you think you have him at 7, 8, 9 in your personal top 10 rankings, maybe you think the decision is and was and forever will be a terrible idea or a terrible thing that ruined basketball or ruined the way you watch basketball or the way you enjoy basketball. Hey, want to talk about that too? You want to talk about college football, whether you think it's going to happen, whether you don't think it's going to happen, how you think it's going to happen, whether you think it's going to happen in the fall, whether you think it's going to happen in the spring, all that stuff. I'm more than happy to discuss with you. So again, like I said, find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. You can talk, we can chat, we can debate, we can discuss. Also, if you like what you've heard today, like you've heard in past episodes, you can find us on, not you find us, I already told you that. You can subscribe to the podcast. Make sure you never miss an episode. Make sure you're on top when we drop our latest stuff. Also, again, if you like what you've heard today, or like what you've heard in the past, then give us a 5-star rating, write us a nice review. Very appreciated. Very helpful. I'll see that you guys did like it. Allow us to see what you guys maybe didn't like, and I'll see ways we can improve. All that fun stuff. But yeah, that'll do it for me here today on the GSMC Sports Podcast presented by GSMC Podcast Network. I want to thank you guys for listening, as always. And before I get out of here, I want to give my shout out to essential workers, as I always do. So, shout out to you guys working through the pandemic, helping us make sure that we can stay safe. Me, being a normal citizen, can stay safe. Even though maybe what you're working through, what you're dealing with, is not necessarily that safe. I still see people on Twitter or social media complaining about having to wear a mask when, like, literally every other country wore a mask because they didn't make it political. It wasn't like a Democrat or Republican thing, which is like a human rights thing. And that's what it is. It's just like, hey, we should try to protect people and not get people sick. So let's just wear a mask. And then, like, we could be enjoying the things that every other country is enjoying. And we wouldn't be in fear that sports aren't going to happen when they're happening all over the world. But somehow in America, we haven't figured that out yet. But hey, that's just me. So yeah, the EMTs, nurses, doctors, firefighters, delivery drivers, grocery store workers, anybody that's been deemed essential, that's been working through this pandemic this whole time, shout out to you. Again, you've been helping keep everybody else safe, even though you may not have been all that safe. And like I said, just wear a mask. That's all I ask. I didn't mean to rhyme, but it worked. So just wear a mask. But yeah, I've been Chris Blades. That has been my time. And until next time, peace out.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.